My name is Elise Moreau. I'm 28 years old, an architect by trade, and I live in a quiet, ivy-draped house on the outskirts of Paris. It's the kind of place that looks like it belongs in an old painting, peaceful, a little forgotten, and entirely mine. My days are spent with blueprints and long hours at my desk, drawing out other people's dreams while quietly holding on to my own. From the outside, my life seems calm and settled, but the roots of who I am run deeper than the walls I design. It hasn't always been peaceful. My childhood was shaped by a different kind of architecture, one built from my mother Colette's favoritism, her quiet but cutting jealousy. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was constant, and it left marks I'm still tracing today. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories, they're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. This is the story I've never told before. It's about betrayal and silence. But more than that, it's about strength and the kind of family you build when the one you're born into tries to break you. Chapter 1: A Mother's Name, Not Her Heart. I've never called her Maman. To most daughters, the word feels warm, like a soft scarf wrapped around your shoulders. For me, it's a title I was never allowed to use. "Call me Colette," she'd say, her voice sharp and clipped, like the stiletto tap of her Louboutins echoing through our parquet-floored apartment. Maman makes me sound old. She meant it. 43, Colette was a fashion editor at Vogue France, spending her days around photo shoots in Saint-Germain-des-Prés and her evenings gliding under chandeliers at cocktail parties. Her auburn hair fell perfectly around her shoulders, always styled, always polished. Every outfit was a statement, structured, deliberate. She looked like she belonged in a glossy magazine. But motherhood? That was something she wore like a dress 2 sizes too small. Colette was only 17 when she got pregnant with me. She reminded me often. "You weren't planned, Elise," she'd say, not cruelly, just with a flat kind of finality, like a disappointing fact she had learned to live with. Her green eyes never met mine when she said it. They always looked past me, usually at her own reflection. She and my father, Julien, were high school sweethearts. A passionate romance born in the bohemian streets of Montmartre, late-night walks, cheap wine, idealistic dreams. But dreams fade. When Colette told him she was pregnant, he offered financial support but refused marriage. "I want to be a father," he said, "but I won't marry just because of a mistake." To Colette, that choice was unforgivable. Broke the fairy tale she had built in her mind. Her resentment became my inheritance. Every time Julien visited, it was like a storm rolled into the apartment. He'd pull up in his worn Citroën, carrying a gentle smile and a stack of books, and the tension in the air would thicken. Colette would mutter under her breath, her movements sharp. "He's a coward," she'd hiss while unloading the dishwasher, every clink of porcelain louder than it needed to be. "He doesn't love you enough to stay with me." And I, small, quiet, wide-eyed, believed her. I'd lie awake in my narrow bed, its headboard pressed against a wall covered in my sketches, wondering why my father didn't love me enough to fix things. Maybe if I were smarter or quieter or better, he would have stayed. But Julien wasn't the coward she painted him to be. He was steady. Always steady. Every weekend, he'd show up on time. He never missed a visit. He brought books, art history, Renaissance architecture, even children's guides to Gothic cathedrals. And he listened. Truly listened. He never interrupted when I rambled about design ideas or flipped through my sketchbook. He'd take me to the Louvre, pointing to sculptures and telling me their hidden stories, or sit with me in little cafes, our hands wrapped around mugs of thick hot chocolate. He never missed a child support payment, never raised his voice, never said a bad word about Colette. His love wasn't loud, but it was solid like stone beneath water. Chapter 2: A Sister's Light, A Mother's Shadow. When I was 6, Colette met Francois. He was a rising star in the culinary world, a chef with a Michelin-starred restaurant in the Marais and a smile that lit up magazine covers. He was everything Colette wanted: stylish, ambitious, respected. Their romance was whirlwind and theatrical. They married in a chateau in the Loire Valley, with lace napkins, candlelit orchards, and a guest list full of names I recognized from fashion covers. Then came Amélie. She was born barely a year later, and everything changed. Francois, to his credit, welcomed me into his life without hesitation. He treated me kindly, never making me feel like a leftover from another chapter. I remember his hand showing me how to knead brioche dough, how to test crème brûlée by tapping the top gently. He listened when I told him about my school projects. He encouraged my drawings. But Colette became someone else. Amélie was the sun around which her world now revolved. She had the same auburn curls, the same green eyes. She was delicate, soft-voiced, graceful. Colette dressed her in Dior's children's line, photographed her in front of our loft windows bathed in morning light, and enrolled her in ballet classes at the Opéra Garnier before she could even read. Our home became Amélie's stage, and I faded into the curtains. When I asked for new art supplies, I was told I didn't need them. "Stop being so demanding," Colette would say, her tone dismissive. When I mentioned I needed new shoes, she tossed me a pair of Amélie's outgrown ones. Still good enough. Don't waste my money. Birthdays revealed everything. Amélie's were magical, ballrooms filled with guests, pastries shaped like animals, live violinists. Mine were forgotten or minimized. I remember my 9th birthday most clearly. I had asked, weeks ahead, if I could invite a few classmates. Colette barely looked up from her phone. "Don't be dramatic, Elise. It's just a birthday." That year, I had takeaway pizza and no candles. Julian called at midnight, as always. He never missed it. His voice over the phone was warm, a little tired, but full of love. He sent a set of charcoal pencils that year and a second-hand book on European cathedrals. Inside was a note: "Your imagination builds more than walls. Never stop drawing." Cried when I read it. Amélie and I were close in spite of it all. She would sneak into my room after bedtime, holding her worn stuffed rabbit by one ear. We'd sit cross-legged on the floor, giggling, trading secrets. She'd ask me to braid her hair, and I'd tell her stories I invented on the spot. I loved her deeply. I never blamed her. It wasn't her fault she was the favorite. Till the divide Colette created left scars. 12, I finally asked her the question that had weighed on me for years. My voice trembled. "Why do you love Amélie more than me?" She didn't hesitate, didn't soften. "Go cry to your father," she said coldly. "This is his fault." That was the end of it. She turned back to her magazine as if I hadn't spoken. It was always Julian's fault. Always someone else's. Never hers. Chapter 3: Escaping to Amsterdam. 18, I left Paris behind. I packed my sketches, my books, and the parts of myself Colette hadn't managed to shape, and I boarded a train to Amsterdam. I had chosen the city for its architecture, yes, but also for its rhythm, its openness, the way the sunlight touched the brick buildings and spilled into the canals. I needed air. I needed distance. And Amsterdam offered both. The university campus sat beside the IJ River, its modern glass buildings reflecting clouds and bicycles as students hurried past with tote bags and coffee cups. I moved into a small flat not far from Vondel Park. It had uneven floors and a window that faced a quiet street of elm trees. It was imperfect, but it was mine. Quiet hum of Dutch voices outside and the clatter of trams were nothing like Paris, and that made me love it more. Colette barely noticed I had left. She called only when she remembered to, usually late at night and always distracted. Her words were clipped, perfunctory. She'd talk about fashion shows, tight deadlines, her growing influence in the industry. "Are you still doing architecture?" she'd ask, as if it were a passing phase, like a diet or a crush. Calls ended quickly, her voice always disappearing before I could say much. But others noticed. Francois visited first. He brought jars of his homemade duck confit and slices of brioche wrapped in wax paper. He complimented my Dutch pronunciation, which was still clumsy, and teased me gently about the cold. He made my kitchen smell like home, even if home was something I didn't quite recognize anymore. Amélie came next, bounding off the train with her sketchpad and stories. She was older now, 14, curious and full of questions. We sat by the Kiezersgracht and sketched the canal houses, their gabled roofs and crooked charm. She told me she wanted to study art, and I encouraged her, biting back the fear that Colette would crush her creativity just as she tried to crush mine. Julien came during the fall. The leaves had turned orange, and the city looked like a painting. He took me to the Rijksmuseum, and we wandered through its halls slowly, stopping in front of Vermeer and Rembrandt. His voice was low, steady, full of small historical anecdotes that wrapped around me like a warm scarf. He never rushed our conversations. He simply gave me space to speak, to think, to be. Their presence softened something in me. Their love, each in their own quiet way, filled the gaps Colette had left hollow. In Amsterdam, I came alive. My professors noticed my designs, simple, clean lines with an eye for sustainability. I was drawn to natural materials and spaces that breathed. I spent late nights in the studio, sketching under dim lights, fueled by coffee and the quiet hum of Dutch rain. I joined a student group focused on eco-architecture, and my portfolio began to grow not just in volume but in voice. In between classes, I'd sit by the canals with my sketchbook or bike along the Amstel River, letting the wind clear my thoughts. Slowly, I began to believe in my own ability not just to draw buildings but to build a life. And then I met Lucas. He was a photographer, tall, kind-eyed, with a laugh that made strangers smile. We met at a student art exhibit, where I stood admiring a series of black and white street photographs. He noticed me studying one of his prints, a quiet shot of a woman waiting at a tram stop, her face half in shadow, and came over to ask what I saw in it. We talked for hours that night, about light, composition, perspective. He told me he loved capturing stillness. I told him I loved designing spaces that held it. Our connection was easy, organic. We began spending our evenings together, biking past windmills at sunset, sipping wine in his small studio, surrounded by his photographs taped carelessly to the walls. He'd photograph my sketches, calling them portraits of ideas, and sometimes frame them next to his own work. We made plans. He wanted to document the world, I wanted to shape it. We talked about building a life where we could do both, me designing eco-friendly homes, him capturing the people who would live in them. He saw beauty in the ordinary. And when he looked at me, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. I graduated in June. It was a bright, breezy day, the kind Amsterdam gifts you with every now and then. My name was called, I walked across the stage, and for a moment, the years of doubt and silence and secondhand praise melted away. My family came. Julien stood in the crowd, his face lit with quiet pride. Francois clapped me on the back afterward and handed me a small bottle of wine, labeled with my graduation date in gold pen. Amélie hugged me so tight I nearly dropped my diploma. And Colette, she was there too. But only because Francois had insisted. She arrived late, in a silk scarf and oversized sunglasses, the kind that made people look twice. Her perfume trailed behind her like a shadow. She didn't compliment my speech. She didn't ask about my portfolio. But when she met Lucas, something in her shifted. For a moment, she was all charm, compliments and laughter and lingering glances. But it didn't last. Over drinks after the ceremony, she leaned toward me, wine glass in hand, and smiled too sweetly. "He's too good for you, Elise," she said with a little laugh, as if it were harmless. As if it were a joke. Her words were polished, cruelty disguised as cleverness. I felt them land, sharp and familiar. I tried to brush it off. But later, over lunch at a canal-side cafe, she did it again. She raised her glass and laughed as she said to the table, "Lucas must be with you out of pity. You're lucky he sees something charming in plain girls." The words hung in the air like smoke. My cheeks burned. I looked around the table, Julian frozen, Francois looking down, Amélie wide-eyed. But I didn't stay quiet. "Your comments are inappropriate," I said calmly. My voice didn't shake. "I'm more than my looks. And Lucas knows that." Table fell silent. Lucas reached under the table and squeezed my hand. Julian shot Colette a look I had rarely seen in him, sharp, protective. Colette gave a thin laugh, waved her hand like it was nothing. But her eyes had darkened. Just for a second. That was when I understood she hadn't changed. She'd simply lost control of the story. Chapter 4: The Seeds of Jealousy. Lucas and I dated for 3 years, a time marked by growth, learning, and a gentle kind of love I hadn't known before. He supported my passion for architecture with unwavering pride, attending my gallery shows and praising my designs as if they were masterpieces. We built a rhythm, biking through Vondel Park, making pasta from scratch on lazy Sundays, dreaming aloud of a shared future with sunlit studios and green rooftops. But something odd lingered in the background. Colette, who rarely bothered to check in on my life, had become surprisingly active on Lucas's social media. She liked his photos of tulip fields, commented on his black and white portraits, even messaged him links to photography exhibitions in Paris. First, I dismissed it as harmless. Maybe she was trying to connect in her own distant way. But it felt off, disconnected from the indifference she showed toward me. Lucas noticed it too. One night, while we lay sprawled on the floor of his loft in Amsterdam, flipping through old sketchbooks, he looked at me and said, "I don't think she's just being friendly, Elise. I think your mother's jealous of you." I blinked. "Jealous?" He nodded slowly, serious. "She undermines you constantly. The way she laughs at your achievements or calls you lucky instead of talented. She talks down to you in front of others. That's not love, Elise. That's competition." I wanted to argue, but the words caught in my throat. Deep down, I knew he was right. I'd always brushed off Colette's digs as quirks or generational differences, her way of being brutally honest. But when I stepped back, I saw a pattern. My mother never praised me outright. She'd ask about my projects only to critique them. She dismissed my scholarship as generous funding for obscure architecture. And when it came to Lucas, it wasn't just harmless banter. It was as if she couldn't fathom that he'd choose me, admire me, love me. Realizing this hurt in a way I wasn't prepared for. Shook something foundational. A daughter expects many things from her mother: guidance, patience, pride. Not rivalry. I stopped sharing good news with Colette. When I was offered a summer residency in Rotterdam, I told Julian instead. When my firm invited me to speak at a green design conference, I texted Amélie. I kept our conversations brief, polite, and distant. I couldn't risk her raining on moments I'd worked so hard to earn. When Lucas and I eventually parted ways, it wasn't dramatic. No fights. No betrayal. Just the quiet recognition that our paths were veering apart. His toward global photography projects in Nairobi and Cape Town, mine back to Paris, to the city where my career had finally taken root. We hugged tightly at the train station, tears in our eyes, promising to remain friends. But as weeks turned to months, the calls faded. Memories settled into nostalgia. Returning to Paris felt both like coming home and stepping into the unknown. I joined a respected architecture firm specializing in sustainable urban housing. The hours were long, but the work mattered. My designs began to appear in local journals, and I found myself invited to panel discussions and city planning boards. It was the kind of recognition I'd once craved from Colette but no longer needed. I was building something real, foundations not only in stone and timber but in confidence and self-worth. Occasionally, I'd hear from her. Short calls. "I saw your name in Le Monde," she'd say, before pivoting to complain about a new assistant or brag about a fashion gala. Her tone held no warmth, just observation. I'd respond with a flat thanks and hang up as soon as I could. The pain didn't vanish, but I learned to live beside it. Like a scar, it no longer bled, but it marked me. Reminded me of the fragile line between love and resentment, and how sometimes the people meant to lift you can't bear to see you fly. Chapter 5. A new chapter with Nicholas. 2 years ago, I met Nicholas, a literature professor at the Sorbonne with kind eyes and a quiet steadiness that made me feel safe for the first time in years. We met in a small, dusty bookshop tucked behind the Pantheon, both reaching for the same worn copy of Les Fleurs du Mal. He offered it to me with a shy smile, but I insisted we read it together. That afternoon turned into coffee, which turned into dinner, which turned into us. Nicholas loved old jazz records, rainy Sundays, and long, meandering conversations about poetry and philosophy. He listened when I spoke, really listened, as if my thoughts were something precious. I told him about architecture, about the emotional weight of space, about how buildings could hold memories. He told me about Baudelaire's sadness, the ache of exile in Rimbaud. We made sense to each other. When I found out I was pregnant, I cried, not out of fear, but something closer to awe. It was unexpected, yes, but deeply right. Nicholas held me close and whispered, "This is our next great chapter." We married 3 months later, in a quiet vineyard ceremony just outside Paris. The air was heavy with lavender and early summer sun. Amélie stood beside me, radiant in soft blue silk, her hands never letting go of mine. François baked the cake and kissed my cheek with fatherly pride. Julien walked me down the aisle and cried the whole time. Colette came, of course, because she couldn't not. She wore cream and pearls, her smile fixed and cold. I tried not to care, tried to focus on the vows, the light, the trembling joy of it all. But later, when the dancing had started and the stars had begun to peek out above the vines, she cornered me behind the reception tent. "I never thought you'd marry someone like Nicholas," she said. Lucas had stature, potential. It was so absurd I almost laughed. Lucas hadn't spoken to me in years. He was a chapter long since closed. But Nicholas saw me. Not my image, not my resume, not my body, me. Her words should have bounced off. Instead, they clung to me like smoke. I said nothing. I just walked away. We waited until the honeymoon was over to announce the pregnancy. Amélie cried. Julien picked me up and spun me around. François brought out wine even though I couldn't drink it. But Colette's face froze, her lips twitching into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're too young," she said. Too ambitious to throw it away. But it was her next words that ended everything. "I can't believe you got pregnant before Amélie," she said. She was supposed to be the first, as if children were trophies, as if I'd stolen something. That night I drew a line. "If you can't celebrate this child," I told her, voice shaking, "you don't belong in our lives." She left furious. And for the first time I felt free. Chapter 6. The Betrayal Unveiled. The fallout was immediate. Colette bombarded me with messages, claiming I was overreacting, blaming my hormones for my outburst. She insisted she had a right to voice her doubts about my rushed marriage and pregnancy. But I held firm, supported by Amélie and François, who called her out for her cruelty. For the first time, Colette seemed to realize I was serious about cutting her out. She sent a reluctant apology, promising to be less negative, but the damage was done. I couldn't trust her, not after years of her undermining me. 3 months later, Amelie threw me a baby shower in a sunlit garden in Versailles, the air fragrant with roses and macarons piled high on porcelain trays. It was perfect, friends and family laughing, Nicholas's hand warm in mine, a table overflowing with gifts for our baby. Colette was there, quieter than usual, her eyes darting nervously to the garden gate. I assumed she was still sulking from our fight, but I focused on the joy of the day. Then came her surprise. As guests sipped rose, Colette stood, her voice bright with misplaced triumph. "I have a special guest for Elise," she announced, her smile tight. The gate opened, and there stood Lucas, my ex, looking as confused as I felt. My heart sank. What was he doing here at my baby shower of all places? The guests fell silent, their murmurs fading into stunned awkwardness. Colette, oblivious to the tension, declared she'd invited Lucas to give me a second chance. She claimed I was settling with Nicholas, that Lucas was my true match, and that my pregnancy was a mistake I'd regret. "You don't have to do this, Elise," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Lucas is here for you." The guests froze, their eyes darting between us. Amelie's jaw dropped, Francois's face darkened, and Nicholas's hand tightened around mine. I looked at Lucas, his face flushed with embarrassment. He stepped forward, his voice steady but apologetic. "I'm sorry, Elise," he said. "I didn't want to come, but I had to tell you the truth." He revealed how Colette had been messaging him for weeks, urging him to save me from my life with Nicholas. She'd called my pregnancy a mistake, claiming I was throwing away my potential by becoming a mother so soon. "She's jealous of you," he said, turning to Colette, whose face was now scarlet. "She's always been jealous of your happiness, your success. I came to expose her because you deserve to know." The garden was electric with tension. Lucas continued, his voice firm. "Colette, you need to stop. Leave Elise alone and move on with your life." He handed me a small gift, a handmade photo frame for the baby, before apologizing again. "I'm happy for you, Elise," he said. "You've built something beautiful. Don't let her take that away." I thanked him, my voice shaking, grateful for his honesty. Colette stood frozen, her usual confidence replaced by humiliation. The guests, including Amelie and Francois, were horrified, their whispers a chorus of disbelief. Colette mumbled an excuse and fled, her heels sinking into the grass. The rest of the shower was subdued, but Nicholas and Amelie rallied everyone, turning the focus back to the baby. I was shaken but resolute, knowing I'd seen Colette's true colors. Chapter 7: A Family Rebuilt. That moment was a turning point. Amelie and I cut contact with Colette, unable to forgive her betrayal. Francois, devastated by her actions, separated from her, realizing her selfishness extended beyond me. He confronted her, but she refused to apologize, justifying her behavior as protecting me. Julien threatened legal action if she tried to interfere in my life again, his voice fierce with protectiveness. The family rallied around me, their support a shield against Colette's toxicity. 8 months later, Nicholas and I welcomed our daughter, Claire, a healthy, bright-eyed girl with her father's kind eyes. We moved into a renovated farmhouse in the Normandy countryside, where I designed a nursery with soft blues and sketches of Parisian rooftops. My work as an architect thrives, my designs for sustainable homes winning awards across Europe. Amelie, now a budding illustrator, visits often, sketching portraits of Claire. Francois brings his famous tarte tatin, and Julien reads Claire stories from his history books, his voice soothing her to sleep. Colette is a ghost in our lives, her absence a relief. I've learned to let go of the pain she caused, focusing on the family I've built. Nicholas and I dream of growing our family, of teaching Claire to love art, poetry, and the beauty of a life well lived. My sketches now hang in galleries, my buildings stand as testaments to my resilience, and my heart is full. As for Colette, I hope she finds peace, but I no longer carry the weight of her envy. I've built my own world, one of love and light, and no one, not even my mother, can dim that. I've learned valuable lessons from my journey. First, self-worth isn't defined by others' approval, even a parent's. Second, setting boundaries protects your peace from toxic relationships. Third, love and support from chosen family can heal deep wounds. Fourth, resilience means rising above jealousy to build your own path. Finally, honesty like Lucas's can reveal hidden truths, empowering you to move forward. These lessons shaped my life, and I hope they inspire you. If this resonates, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of strength and growth.